Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, June the 26th, 2024. In this video, I'm going to talk about two people, namely Princess Anne and Julian Assange. Now, the reason I'm talking about Princess Anne is because she has been in the news recently, because she had an accident on her estate in, I think it's in Gloucestershire in England. And, you know, I'm not really into the royal family, but the thing about Princess Anne is we've got a time chart. I don't have to explain who she is. She's the former British Queen's daughter. So, you know, I don't have to say why this person is significant. And she's had an accident. You know, people have accidents. I think she was kicked by a horse and has got concussion. So the astrology of accidents is important, and I thought it would be a useful exercise to see if anything was happening to her over the last few days, which might have suggested an accident. You know, as I said, we all have accidents, and just because she's a member of the royal family doesn't mean we can't use her as an example. I also want to actually look at another event in her life, which was her when there was an attempt in 1974 by someone to kidnap her. You know, in a way, that is another accident, and she's had accidents in the past. I think she's had at least one other concussion. She had a concussion, I think, at the Montreal Olympics in 1976. I think she was even injured in the Moscow Olympics, which I suppose would have been 1980. But I couldn't find dates for those events. Even the Montreal concussion, sometime late July, but I didn't find anything particularly, late July 1976. So yes, Princess Anne is one person I do want to look at. Another person is Julian Assange, because the news has just come out that he has been released, and on Monday he was officially released at Stansted Airport in UK, and I think he's now flown back to Australia. So I did want to consider his chart. I didn't actually find a great deal going on at the exact time of his release. There was a trine between the Moon and Jupiter, but his solar arc directions were potentially interesting. But before I consider Princess Anne and Julian Assange, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, July the 26th, 2024. Now, I don't think that a great deal is actually happening today. The moon is in Pisces. There you go. Moon at 5 degrees Pisces at noon in New York. And the moon is trine the sun. So now that the moon has gone into Pisces, the water emphasis returns. And, you know, we have 6 planets in water signs. We've got the 3 Cancer planets, Sun, Venus and Mercury, plus we've got Moon, Saturn and Neptune. So with the moon moving into Pisces, the fire has collapsed again. We don't have any planets in fire signs except the North Node and Chiron. So many of us might feel that there isn't much of a spark, that we have to try very hard to make things happen and to sort of make connections. Connections is actually a very important part of being a fire sign. Just these intuitive connections between things and events that are facilitated by plenty of fire. So in order to understand what's going on, we have to rely not so much on our intuition, but on our feelings, and feelings are going to be powerful today. It's an emotional environment, and there's actually not a great deal of air. We've got Jupiter and Jupiter and Pluto in air signs, but you know the emphasis is very much on water. So it's perhaps a day when many of us might feel that there's not a lot to be said, that we perhaps need to use our feelings rather than our thoughts. Now, the moon is making a trine aspect to the sun. So moon in Pisces making a trine to sun in Cancer. And so moon trine sun can represent a certain amount of harmony. It is the cosmic marriage with sun and the moon. The moon and the sun are together. And this can create a healthy and harmonious day when our feelings are in tune with whatever is going on around us. Though the moon does make a square to Jupiter, and that square to Jupiter may in certain cases cause a certain amount of exaggeration. We perhaps respond too quickly on an emotional level to whatever is happening around us, or we might take something too far with moon square Jupiter. It can be maybe taking our emotions too far. It can be over expenditure in certain cases, because Jupiter exaggerates what it touches. And yes, it's possible that we might find ourselves spending too much money, or maybe being too generous, or in general just overreacting to something which may in itself be relatively unimportant. Another aspect going on is Mercury trine Saturn. I think that trine between Mercury and Saturn is useful. I don't think it's particularly exciting, but Saturn is providing some kind of restraint on Mercury. Our minds are not going to be going all over the place. Our minds are not going to be excessively influenced by our emotions. Even if our emotions are strong, we're able to exercise a certain amount of discipline. And we can also exercise discipline in terms of how we communicate. We can use words that are relatively restrained. We might be tempted to say something that could be misconstrued, or we might be tempted to express our real feelings, but something holds us back. And so I think that is useful, to be drawn back off the brink. We don't have to insult anyone unless it's really necessary. We can exercise real restraint. Looking at the heliocentric picture, here is the position of the planets from a heliocentric view, and you will see that the Earth is getting closer and closer to the square with Mars. There's the Earth at 532 Capricorn, and it's making there's a square to Mars. Now that square to Mars is not exact today. That will more be about tomorrow and perhaps the day after. But it still creates the possibility of a certain amount of aggravation, getting angry about things, getting annoyed. It can also suggest violent and unpleasant events, probably in the collective rather than in our own lives. So I don't think we need to worry excessively about that Earth square Mars. And also, going back to the geocentric picture, I said that there's this Mercury trine Saturn. Yes, Earth square Mars might encourage us to get annoyed, but Mercury trine Saturn, I think, will succeed in most cases in holding us back. So that's a heliocentric picture. Now, overall, there's actually not a lot going on today. I said the same yesterday. It seems to be a time, it's not going to last long, where there's in general just not much action. And so maybe that's a good thing. But it does mean that in terms of my interpretations of the 12 signs, I am going to be, I think, briefer than usual. But anyway, let's see what I can find. And so I am going to do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, June the 26th, 2024. Aries. Aries, I think in many ways you want to keep a low profile. I don't think you feel any great need to be seen and heard. Okay, I'm sure you've always got something to say, but I think you realize that it's a time when you need to hold back. Now, I do know that the Earth is making a heliocentric square to Mars, and that does suggest to me, Aries, that there are certain things that annoy you. Things happening in your world that you're not happy about, and probably your annoyance levels are increasing, but now is not the right time to make a scene. But I think you know this, and you understand that the best strategy is to just, as I said, keep a low profile and be very careful what you say. I think you will be careful what you say. You know that there are things that eventually will have to be said, but right now it's probably best to keep them to yourself. Now, that doesn't mean to say, though, that your mind is not very busy. I think your mind is actually very active at the moment. There are lots of things going through your mind. Yes, there are things that you're angry about, but at the same time, you're starting to see opportunities and possibilities. You don't really want to talk about them, and I think that's right that you don't want to talk about them. It would be nice to talk about them, certainly, but I don't think that you're going to really find a suitable environment. I think if you were to tell people what was on your mind, it would feel that you would be just talking to an empty room. Yeah, there might be people there, but their responses might be flat and empty, and it's always a terrible feeling when you've got something important to say and you say it and people aren't listening or they're distracted, and it just makes you feel angry and devalued. So keep your better thoughts to yourself. Work on them more. There is plenty to be done. I know that you would really like something to be clarified. You'd love to tell someone what was on your mind, but I don't think it's now is the right time. Perhaps you've got more work to do, or as I've already suggested, just people might be somewhat distracted. So, Aries, keep it simple, and perhaps it's a time to observe from a distance. From your distance, the further away you are from things, the bigger your view, and that distance will give you perspective. And once you have perspective, you'll be in a better position to take decisive action. And that's going to happen. Maybe in a couple of days' time. Maybe when the moon moves into Aries. The moon is currently in Pisces, by the way. So in a day or two's time, the moon will change sign. And I think you'll be better able to make an impact. Taurus, you feel, I think, a certain sense of harmony, that things are just working, things are happening. There's not a huge amount of excitement, but there doesn't have to be excitement. We've got the moon making a trine to the sun, and I think that you're going to get on pretty well with other people. I don't think you're going to get on spectacularly with anyone. There's just going to be a general sense of oneness and harmony, and there's going to be a lack of conflict. So I think for most Taurians, it should be a relatively easy day. Though, watch out for unexpected exaggeration. The reason there might be unexpected exaggeration is that the moon is making a square to Jupiter. Now, it's not really a big deal, this square between the moon and Jupiter, but it might encourage you, once you start doing something, to keep doing it, and it may not be especially healthy. I suppose you have to be a little careful when it comes to money. Jupiter has been in Gemini for quite some time now. It's beginning to establish itself in Gemini. I suppose Jupiter's been in Gemini, for about a month? And Gemini is a sign which in the Taurian chart is often associated with money. And so with Moon square Jupiter, you might be encouraged to maybe spend too much money without even knowing what you're doing. You just feel that you need to express yourself by spending, and once you start spending, it may be difficult to stop. You may see you need to buy one thing, and then if you buy one thing, you need to buy another thing, and it just gets a little bit out of control. So don't get caught up in financial issues in terms of either spending money or even worrying about money, because it can work the other way. Moon square Jupiter can encourage you to think about money, to think about other people and money, and how people are responding to financial issues and not being happy about it, and you thinking that people are making financial mistakes, and you perhaps want to say something, and it could just all get out of hand. So if possible, Taurus, I would try to avoid financial issues, either because they might be expensive or because you might be raising subjects which are inappropriate and might cause a little bit of upset. So overall, I think if you can avoid money, I think it can be a good day. And I also think that people are going to like you and respect you. It seems that you have good ideas about how to establish your identity within a social environment, and you're going to be helped by a sense of natural responsibility. You will come over in a group situation as being a responsible person, as someone who can be trusted, though still try to avoid money and try to avoid making statements about money or trying to tell people what to do and what not to do about money, even if you're fairly sure that you're right. But your sense of responsibility and groundedness, I think, will help boost your respect, and I think that people are going to regard you as being a good person to have around. Gemini, you are actually quite charismatic today. It might not feel it. You might just feel it's just another day, that there are things to do. Other people are just going to do their own thing. But actually you are being noticed, and you can be noticed even more, and people will respond to you, I believe, in quite a favourable way. And because people are going to respond to you favourably, that does actually give you a certain amount of power. You can exert your influence and create links with perhaps new people, and old relationships can become stronger. And in fact, Gemini, you may actually be slowly moving to the centre of things, and your opinions are going to matter. And I just think in general you're going to be quite charismatic today. It's not going to be an immediate thing. It's slowly building up your presence. And I also think that you're going to be helped by a square between the Moon and Jupiter. Now, this square between the Moon and Jupiter is going to be difficult for some people, but I don't think it's going to be difficult for Gemini. So what this square between the Moon and Gemini allows you to do is, be optimistic, but also decisive. That's because, the Moon is in Pisces. And in the Gemini chart, Pisces is quite a high-profile sign. It's you up there, dealing with the public, or at least able to deal with the public. And because it's square Jupiter, and Jupiter's in Gemini, you can project your vision, and as well as your optimism. We're living in difficult times. All of us are living in difficult times. And sometimes things seem a little bit grim, but Gemini, you do have a fundamental sense of optimism, that things can be better. Now, you probably have some elaborate view about how things can be better, that you somehow have to make a change, that we all have to make a change. We have to move from one state to another state. At least I think that's what you feel. But you do see opportunities, and I think you're really able to share these opportunities. And this is especially the case if you have a position of responsibility, whether it's at work, in your family, in your social life. People will start looking up to you, and your vision and your optimism can grab people's attention. Of course, you have to find a way of articulating that optimism and putting it in a package that people can understand. And that brings us on to another aspect going on today, which is a trine aspect between Mercury and Saturn. And I know on the surface that Mercury trine Saturn doesn't sound particularly optimistic. I mean, Mercury trine Saturn, you might think, oh, well, that's serious thinking. But it's happening at the same time as a Moon-Jupiter square. So the Moon-Jupiter square is about the possibility of being optimistic, seeing things in a new way. But Mercury trine Saturn is about packaging the packaging the message in a way that makes things possible. It's not good enough, really, is it, to just say that things are wonderful, everything's going to be fine, things are going to get better. That in itself is a waste of time. And as a Gemini, you, of all people, really do understand that. And so perhaps what your real challenge today is to package things. Work out what is possible, like today or tomorrow. What is possible not just for you, but what is also possible for everyone else. Just take it one step at a time. And your careful, disciplined approach, but never forgetting people's need for hope, and in fact your own need for hope. That careful, disciplined approach is really going to be appreciated. So, Gemini, see what you can do. I think that you are a force for good today. Cancer. The moon is now in Pisces, and I think that is a good thing from a Cancerian perspective. It just makes things a whole lot easier, especially, remembering that the moon is now in a water sign. Cancer is in a water sign, and the moon is making a trine to the sun. Now, I understand that perhaps over the last couple of days I haven't been particularly enthusiastic about what's going on in the lives of Cancerians, but I think right now we have got real cause to be optimistic. Moon trine sun really is a fortunate aspect. It allows you to relate in a harmonious way to the world out there. And I think that people are going to like you. And at the same time, you're going to be imaginative. Sometimes, with Cancer, one can fall into the trap of seeing Cancer as being a somewhat security-orientated sign that may be a little boring because it's cautious. But that is completely untrue. Okay, it's security-orientated, but I don't think there's anything boring about the sign Cancer. As I like to tell Cancerians, some of the greatest writers are Cancerians. Hunter S. Thompson, for example, or Ernest Hemingway. I don't think you'd regard Ernest Hemingway and Hunter S. Thompson as boring people. Hunter S. Thompson, was it Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? I actually read that book once. So you can really use your imagination today. It's on great form. And you're going to have ideas which could be quite future orientated. You're not going to be stuck in terms of what is happening today and the limitations of today. You can actually see the possibilities for the future. And I think you can share this. I think that people are going to be very interested in what you have to say and what you have to present. In fact, I think presenting is more important than saying. Because saying, that's just words. The words just go on, and it maybe doesn't achieve much. But if you actually present something that people can see and understand, they will think that is absolutely great, that actually puts your imagination in a real and material context. I don't know how you present that. That's up to you. You're a Cancerian. You're more imaginative than me. So perhaps you can understand how best to present yourself and present your ideas. It could be through writing, just using words in a constructive way and getting your message across. I think you can do that because Mercury is trine Saturn. Mercury, the communication planet, is in Cancer. It's trine Saturn. So you can craft your words, whether it's a written word or the spoken word, and I think that people are really going to go for that. And at the same time, many Cancerians are going to realize that something needs to change, that things have got perhaps a little boring, doing the same things in the same way, but we don't want to carry on like that forever. And you may be starting to plan some kind of adventure. Now, adventures take many forms. Adventures do not necessarily involve travel, as I like to emphasize. You do not have to go travelling to the other side of the world to have an adventure. You do not have to have a massive carbon footprint in order to have adventures. You can have your adventure right where you are. Especially, you've got the internet, you've got plenty of possibilities. It could be in your community. So see how you can expand your horizons and be adventurous. Because, as I said, at the moment you are adventurous, and you need to really maximize your potential and take advantage of the fact that there are 3 planets in your sign. The sun is not going to be in Cancer forever. Soon enough it will leave Cancer and move into Leo. And so, Venus is in Cancer, Mercury is in Cancer. They're not going to be there forever. But right now, with the moon, trine, moon in Pisces in a water sign, trine with those Cancer planets, I think that you can do something really spectacular. So don't waste the opportunity. Leo, you're still feeling a little bit confused and uncertain, I think. It's that kind of day. Things aren't entirely clear. Things actually haven't been clear for a few days. You've had ideas, you've had thoughts, but where's it all going? And I would suggest that you do indeed continue to tread carefully, and that you don't make new commitments. It's just not the time, because I just don't think that the picture is clear enough. So, Leo, take it slowly, and perhaps a lot of the work today needs to be done on your own. And when you're on your own, when you're working on something that's important, I think you can get good results. And, in this light, I don't want to suggest that it's a difficult or an unfortunate day, provided you handle things correctly. There is a trine aspect between the moon and the sun. And the sun is your ruler. And I do think that this trine between the moon and the sun is fortunate if you handle the energy correctly. And in order to handle the energy correctly, ideally you don't need any disturbances, or rather you don't want any disturbances. You want to be in control. If other people start intruding, start making demands and suggestions, it's just going to interfere with the flow. So concentrate on what is important for you right now, and don't feel that you have to be available for anyone. I mean, you can be available to people if you want to be available, if it's the right thing to do, but in most cases I would have said no. You can work it out on your own. I don't know. I suppose you could say that there might be one situation today where you can get some advice. Maybe there's one piece of advice that is required. It's just one thing that you're not entirely sure about, and you can't quite work it out on your own. You can almost work it out, but not quite. And it might therefore be a good idea to consult one person. Perhaps it's a friend or a member of your family, or just someone who you know has the answers. Or what do they call it? Like phone a friend, isn't that right? What's that? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It's like phone a friend. There's one friend maybe you need to phone. Or just phone someone who's an expert on the thing you're concerned about, and I think you'll get the answer you're looking for. And it's a very quick answer. It might take you 1 minute to get that answer, and once you've got the answer, you'll be fine. You'll be self-sufficient, no need to worry about anyone else, and you can start to cover a lot of ground, but in your own way. Virgo. The moon is in Pisces, and Pisces is, of course, your opposite sign. So this does mean that certain relationships probably can't be avoided. But I don't think that is a problem, because the moon is trine the sun. So with the moon trine sun, I think you can actually get on very well with other people, and you can respond to them in a way that is harmonious, that isn't going to rock the boat. So there's no need to spend the day alone. And by reaching out to certain people, especially on an emotional level, I think that you'll be well rewarded. Remember, the moon is in Pisces. It's trine the sun. Both those planets are in water signs. And I know when we talk about emotion, there might be a certain sense that there might be a lack of discipline, because emotions can get all over the place. They can get really messy, and that's not something that Virgoans want. Yet Mercury, which is your ruler, is making a trine to Saturn. So with Mercury trine Saturn, I think that means that you're going to be pretty well organized, and in terms of what you say and how you communicate, you'll be able to choose the right words. Virgoans do have a gift with words. They're very careful with words, and that Mercury trine Saturn allows you to be especially careful, and you'll be able to use your feelings to work out what is appropriate. So I don't think that you're going to be using the wrong words. Though, don't be afraid of giving people constructive advice and criticism. You can be very critical. You can actually be very cutting in your criticism. But today, you can criticize people and make suggestions without causing offense. And that goes back to this Mercury trine Saturn. You will just be careful in terms of how you want to. You'll be careful in terms of how you give your advice, because you'll be able to use your feelings. You will understand that each person has their own sensibilities. There are things they tolerate, there are things they don't tolerate. You'll know that. And so you'll know pretty much what you can get away with when you're communicating. But communication is a two-way process. And it may be the case that you need yourself to listen to some advice. It might just come out of the blue, but it could be, someone you know well, someone who knows your limitations well, might tell you something important. Okay, as a Virgo, you probably don't like being criticized. You're wondering whether it's really appropriate. But if you can take a bit of criticism yourself, I think you'll be able to benefit. I don't think you're going to respond particularly well in the first instance. Someone might say something you don't want to hear. Could relate to your working environment. So at work, people say all sorts of things. If you're working, it might just be you in society, you out there in the world. You're thinking everything's fine, then you're told something you maybe don't want to hear. And it's not anything especially important. but there's just that small danger that you overreact. So Virgo, it's just very important that you don't overreact, because if you were to overreact to a bit of criticism, that would spoil what I think overall should be a very good day. Libra. Yesterday I was pretty positive about Librans, and I think I'm going to be positive again today. I think there are things going on at the moment that you can really benefit from. You are a serious person, and people recognize the fact that you're a serious person, and they will listen to whatever you're saying and whatever you're expressing. So do make the most of the situation, and at the same time you are going to be able to really get noticed, not because you're making a scene, but just because you're in the right place and you're doing the right things. And because you're doing the right things, you're going to get respect. So that means that you don't have to do things other people's way. Just do what feels right, and everything else will flow from that. And I know that as a Libran, you often perhaps make a big effort to fit in, to perhaps compromise, not upset people, but that's not the right approach today. You just have to be yourself, and also consider yourself as something of an organizer. You have a vision about the way things should be, and if things are not right, you'll just know it instinctively. And I think in many cases people want to be organized. We are living in chaotic times, and sometimes people just need to be told what to do. And I think that's a role that you're able to play extremely well today. So, don't be afraid of giving advice, telling people what to do, pointing things out. People will really appreciate it, because really you are providing guidance. And at the same time, relationships and friendships can be really stabilized, and you yourself can come over as something of an authority, and because you're an authority, you can bring people together. And I think we may be thinking about a little bit of leadership here, and this has been brewing for some time. The concept of you as a leader, at least I hope it's been brewing, because we've had planets moving into Cancer. We've now got 3 planets in Cancer, and Cancer in the Libran chart is very status orientated. It's about being seen in public, and it is a time when people need to know who you are and where you stand. And so just don't be afraid of your own authority. It's something that actually people want, and people will really appreciate. And with the moon making a trine aspect to the sun, you're actually in a position to create, I think, a certain amount of harmony. And harmony is what people want. And Libra as a sign puts a high premium on harmony. You don't want arguments, you don't want disagreements, and with the moon trine the sun, you can actually put forward a vision of harmony, which I think people will greatly appreciate. In terms of relationships, it appears that the people who are closest to you are actually quite optimistic if you give them a chance. They have got things to say, things they'd like to say, and you are in a good position to encourage them to express their views. And perhaps what you have to do is create a secure environment where people can communicate, and indeed a secure environment where one person in particular can communicate. It may be someone who in general is perhaps quite stubborn, quite set in their ways. They perhaps feel that change is difficult to find, but deep down they've got something to offer. So Libra, it's a day when maybe you can help people to express their own vision, and once someone is able to express their vision, that can boost your vision. So other people can be a resource, and you may be just the right person to allow this resource to deliver in full. Scorpio. There are a lot of planets in water signs, and Scorpio is a water sign. So, we've got this trine between the sun and the moon in Pisces, sun in Cancer, and that trine is having a direct impact on your sign, which is Scorpio. So although there are no planets in Scorpio at the moment, and there won't be for a bit of time, the fact that you've got the moon trine sun in water signs is giving you a real lift. And I think that things are moving. And that is a big relief, because, recently I think that many Scorpios have been feeling a little bit stuck. Things haven't been moving as fast as you'd like them to be moving. And you perhaps felt that the world wasn't quite on your wavelength, and no one really cared about your feelings. That might have been your view. But now, Scorpio, things are moving, and at the same time you are feeling pretty optimistic and hopeful, and it's a message you want to communicate. Now, in terms of communication, for many of the signs, I've perhaps been suggesting that now might not be a great time for saying things, and that perhaps some of your thoughts should be kept to yourself. And I was particularly thinking about Aries. And Aries is, of course, ruled by Mars, and so Scorpio. But Aries and Scorpio are very different signs. And in your case, I think it is time to get your message out. It's all coming together. And I think people really want to hear what you have to say. You have a unique view of the world, and you actually have a fundamental optimism. And this optimism is perhaps about the recognition that with change and transformation comes hope. Without change and transformation, then maybe there isn't much hope. If you just stay in one place doing the same thing, you refuse to change your skin, then you get stagnation. But being a Scorpio, you understand that process of change, and the whole cycle of hope and fear and stagnation and regeneration. You understand that whole cycle, and you know deep down that now is the time to to change. Change can be difficult, but you recognize that if you change, if other people change, that things really can move forward. And so that is the message you've got to bring. And it's possible that in the first instance people are not going to want to hear that message. But you have to start somewhere. And by being solidly optimistic, but also being very clear about what needs to be done, then eventually you will start getting traction. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to spend all day talking. In fact, you may not have to do any talking at all today, because sometimes the best way of expressing yourself is not through words, but it's through example. You decide that something is important to you, and you're going to do it. Perhaps in a way that people are going to notice, but you're not going to push it in their face. People can notice you if they want. If not, that's their problem. But by doing what's important to you, you are making an impression, and you are actually communicating. So you're actually communicating through maybe actions rather than words. And you are having an impression on the universe. The universe is listening to what you're doing. It's understanding what is happening. And in the end, you'll get the attention that I think that you really deserve. And when it does come to the words, Mercury is trine Saturn. This is a time when you can communicate, I think, with great precision, and you can take ideas which are in themselves quite complicated, but you can sort of bring them down to earth, and you can put it in simple language that everyone can understand. Okay, when I talk about ideas that are complicated, I'm not talking about sort of philosophies and things out of books. It's more about just your ideas about the world. You might think they're complicated, but Scorpios are quite capable of complicating things unnecessarily. But just by being yourself, being very simple, your own view of the world is being expressed. Yeah, it's being expressed without you having to say anything. It's being expressed through your every action. And by doing what you feel is right, what you feel comfortable with, the ripples will spread, and you will have a very real impact. Sagittarius. Many Sagittarians are not going to want to do much today. You'll just feel that people are not especially interested, and at the same time you may not be as extroverted as usual. Now, I don't think that you can really say that particular signs are introverted or extroverted, at least in a psychological sense. I don't think that you could, for example, use a test of introversion and extroversion, I don't know, like the Myers-Briggs test, and let all the 12 signs take this test, and you would find maybe that Geminis are more extroverted than Taurians. I don't think it works like that. I know from my own perspective, I've done an extroversion and one of those introversion extroversion tests, and I'm just off the scale in terms of introversion, and Gemini is supposed to be an extroverted sign. So it's the same with Sagittarius or any other sign. You are not necessarily an introvert or an extrovert. We can't tell that from your sign. I mean, at least in a scientific sense. And I don't think that today, Sagittarius, you are much of an extrovert. I mean, even if you feel that you normally are, I think it's going to be quite difficult for you to make an impression. Not because you can't make an impression, but because I don't think you actually want to make an impression. You would just prefer to be in your own space, doing your own thing. Perhaps you feel that a lot has happened recently and now you just need to relax and recharge your batteries. And that is absolutely fine. And with the moon making a trine to the sun, you can get some really good insights today, perhaps on an emotional level. You know, Sagittarius is not known to be an especially emotional sign, but I think your emotions are actually on good form right now. And you can get in touch with your emotions, and you don't need anyone's help to do that. And by getting in touch with your emotions, you get some powerful insights. Though the moon does make a square to Jupiter, and moon squared Jupiter indicates an interruption. Something disturbs your concentration. Something disrupts your harmony. That person, well, or rather that disruption could be a person. Someone just getting in your way, someone imposing themselves at a time that just seems inconvenient. Okay, it might not be a person, it might be an event, but it just is annoying, and it's not what you wanted to hear, and you just can't be bothered. At least that's your first impression. But I do think that you should try to be bothered. There's something that requires your attention. It might be very small, but I think it is important. And maybe you haven't fully considered the impact of the outside world on you. And it could all be just part of the transition. You know, Jupiter is your ruler. It's moving through Gemini, your opposite sign. And so, you know, it's been in Gemini for about a month now. And so with Jupiter moving through Gemini, you're just getting used to the fact that things on the outside are having an impact on you. People are having an impact. And, you know, okay, you've got a year to work it out, nearly a year, but it's the start. And I think that Moon square Jupiter is just a sign that you have to take into consideration outside events. And I would suggest that you just try to do it with good grace. There's no point in getting angry or annoyed. Okay, if you are feeling angry, annoyed, it's probably best to just keep your feelings to yourself. And, you know, in terms of anger and annoyance, I suppose things are not helped by the fact that deep down, Sagittarius, you are feeling a sense of growing tension. And this tension is probably quite collective. You're feeling what's happening in the world. You're feeling that something has to give, and that things just can't carry on as they've been continuing for the last, I don't know, few months or even a few years. But in the end, something has to give. And perhaps you should be asking yourself, where should it give? And I think you have insights here. And so try to consider the world around you, the community around you, where the fault lines are. And, you know, don't be afraid. These fault lines, you know, probably don't impact you personally. But if you can be aware of them, you know, that would be really good. And I think you'd be preparing yourself and other people for future challenges. Capricorn. I think recently I've been a little bit negative on the prospects for Capricorns. I mean, not really the prospects, but I have been a little bit downbeat. But I think that things are improving for Capricorns, and you are helped by the moon's movement into Pisces. And when the moon moves into Pisces, it makes a trine to the sun, and so many Capricorns are feeling more optimistic. You're starting to be aware of what can be done, what can be achieved, and there's now more movement. I think that's perhaps been a problem recently, Capricorn. There hasn't been enough movement, and where there has been movement, it's like being forced. Yeah, sure, you might have been moving around, going to lots of different places, but it hasn't been pleasant. Perhaps you were doing it because you had to do it, because you'd been told to do it. It wasn't movement on your terms. But now I think you can get movement on your terms. And yes, you are helped by the fact that the moon is now in Pisces and it's making a trine to the sun. It seems that finally people are starting to understand you. They hadn't understood you before. They'd perhaps taken you for granted, but now you're getting through to them, and you are going to be helped not just by the fact that there is a trine between the moon and the sun, but also by the fact that there is a trine between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury trine Saturn, Saturn represents you, and Saturn represents how you come. Mercury represents how you come across, the things you say, and it does mean that with this aspect, you're going to be able to express yourself extremely well, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that is really clear. And people understand immediately. And, once people understand you and they understand where you're coming from and what's important to you, then that is the beginning of respect. And I think that every Capricorn needs respect. And the things you do today and the things you say can really give you respect. And I think that people are going to appreciate you. And if you're doing things today, you will be doing them because you want to do them, not because you're trying to please anyone. Now, in the process of whatever you're doing, I think you can please people. I think you will please people. And that's great, but it is on your terms, because the person, that really matters today is you. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, the moon trine sun is great for relationships. It is about harmony, as I've said on several occasions in this video. So you and other people, you and perhaps the special people in your life, have a clear line of communication and understanding. As I think I've already suggested, but it's going to be really clear. And there's no room for doubt or confusion or misunderstanding. So if you want to focus on relationships today, particularly close relationships, I would really suggest go ahead, because I think you'll be able to certainly stabilize things, but I think also improve things and create a sense of sort of oneness and harmony. So Capricorn, yeah, I know I've been a bit negative in the past, but I think today looks really great. Aquarius. There may be issues with money because, the moon is in Pisces, and Pisces in the Aquarian chart is quite a money-orientated sign. So don't be afraid of dealing with financial issues. I think actually you will do it pretty well. You'll be relatively grounded, and if you want to tackle anything to do with money, I think that you will be successful and you'll be able to get your message across. So don't shy away from that. And also consider the possibility that, at least when it comes to money, that some people don't really know what they're doing. They might actually say they know what they're doing, but if you ask them questions and you ask them to explain themselves, you'll realize that there's a real fog there, that there's a lot of misunderstanding. And that does mean that you should be very wary of getting financial advice today, because that financial advice may be based on a false assumption. And it's not just about money, it's about organization. Organization does matter, and lots of people have ideas about how you should organize yourself. And I don't think that these ideas are especially sensible. And, if you follow someone else's advice, then you don't really understand the full logic of that advice. You don't know why that advice was given. Was that advice given after careful consideration, or is that advice just a reflection of someone's subjectivity and bias? So yes, following people's advice is, I think, in general, probably a bad idea. And if you can be self-contained, so much the better. But even then, you realize that the only person you can really trust is you yourself. You can trust yourself to make the right decision, but other people do have to be watched, or perhaps ignored. So if other people are having an impact on you, then they have to be watched. But if you put yourself in a position where no one's having an impact on you, then sure, you can, at least in a short term, you can ignore people, and that's great. Though you can get through to certain people, though, because of that trine between the moon and the sun. And what you have to do is persuade someone that they're missing out an important detail. That's perhaps the key to influence, or rather, if you want to influence the world. People cannot be influenced if they feel they know all the answers. If they feel everything is fine, they've understood everything is in order. So what you have to do is you have to persuade someone that they don't know all the answers. Show them that there is a gap in their knowledge. And once you show them that there is a gap in their knowledge, I suppose even if that gap in their knowledge doesn't actually exist, if you want to be a manipulative Aquarian. But once people know or feel that there is a gap in their knowledge, they will panic. And at that stage, you can start having a big influence. So this means, Aquarius, that you may actually have a certain position of responsibility. People may actually start to rely on you. So you could be sort of destabilizing people a little bit, and then present yourself as the answer. So yes, responsibility matters. There is actually scope here, Aquarius, for you to behave in a way that is frankly immoral. And that's obviously not something you want to do. If you're going to have an influence on people, it has to come from the right position. You should want the best for them. If you're acting purely on the basis of selfishness, then, that's going to come back and get you in the end. So, Aquarius, today, it's just very important that you do the right thing. Pisces, a good day. It has to be a good day. Moon moving through your sign, and it's making a trine to the sun. So that gives an impression of things just moving very swiftly and very powerfully, but not necessarily dramatically. You are a water sign. We've got the moon in Pisces, your sign, and a water sign. It's making a trine to the sun. You're in a good position, and you're feeling a growing sense of confidence. A confidence in your own feelings and your own judgment, and also in your own decisions. So you've made decisions, I think, about yourself and what you want to do, and it does seem that those decisions feel correct. It feels right, and you're now confident enough to move to the next stage. And I think that that's what Pisceans have been thinking about. What is the next stage? You know that things as they stand right now aren't quite good enough. There's been progress, but at a certain stage you do have to move, hence the next stage. So I think you can start preparing yourself, and that means you may need a certain amount of courage, but not crazy courage, because we're talking about something you knew you always had to do. It had to happen. And I think that now you're ready to make it happen. And it's not a dramatic initiative. It's just moving forward in the direction in which you just know you have to move. And underlying this is actually a certain amount of tension. And I think this tension is quite fortunate. We need tension to motivate ourselves. And at the moment, Pisceans are just feeling that perhaps if they were to stand still for too long, they would maybe ossify, turn to stone. That's one possibility. Or they might explode. And so what perhaps we need is a controlled explosion, maybe happening over a period of weeks and months. This is the time. Something has to move. And yes, Pisces, I think that you are ready to make that move. And in making this move, you need to have full respect for your own creative talent. You are very creative, and right now you are incredibly imaginative. The water signs at the moment, in general, are pretty imaginative. Water signs are imaginative, but you are particularly imaginative at the moment, and you're imaginative in all sorts of different ways. Okay, you're imaginative about some of the darker sides of society and the community in which you live, but you're also imaginative in terms of the possibilities that so far haven't been realized, but soon will be realized, because I think right now you actually know what needs to be done. So Pisces, I think actually it's exciting times for you. And you know that in order to get the excitement you're looking for, you have to make the move from one stage to another. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. Turning to the I Ching, I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 4, youthful folly. We've had this hexagram quite recently. This hexagram is often a warning that the I Ching has been asked too often. I Ching doesn't like being consulted too regularly. And of course, here's me consulting the I Ching every single day. Maybe the I Ching doesn't actually like me doing these videos, having an I Ching reading every single day. You know, there is a view that the I Ching should be only consulted at, really special times, times when there is a crisis, when there's a burning question that has to be asked. For myself, when I ask the I Ching a question, aside from the I Ching for these videos, I don't actually do it very often. In terms of my own I Chings, I don't know. I probably consult the I Ching for myself maybe every 6 months. I don't actually do it very often. But with this youthful folly, there is a sense that someone is being stupid, or someone doesn't know what they're doing. And in this case, I don't necessarily think that it's us. I think it's other people. I think when you are looking at what's happening around you, and all the people you're having to deal with, particularly the people who are having an impact on something important. For example, it might be in your work or in your business, you're having to deal with people. I suppose it could be people in your family, and you're just aware that some people just don't know what they're doing. Maybe they don't have sufficient experience. Maybe they're unwise. Maybe they're just stupid. Don't know. It depends on the situation. So the question is, what do you do? Well, we do have a moving line here with youthful folly. The second line from the bottom moves, and this is indicating a time when we need to be tolerant and patient. We just accept that people are what they are. They maybe they may not know what they're doing, but we're not really strong enough to do anything about it. And at the same time, we can probably put up with other people's follies. We can be patient. And patience is okay up to a point. We can't be patient with people forever, but in the short term, we can just accept people's stupidity, people's carelessness, okay, provided it's not in terms of a safety critical task, but we can maybe correct their mistakes every now and then, but we don't have to make a big fuss about it. And then this second line, it moves. And so the whole hexagram moves to something else. And it moves to hexagram 23, which is splitting apart. And it's not a good hexagram, splitting apart. It represents a couch which its legs have been cut off. the couch is no longer able to fulfill any useful purpose. And you can see, if you look at this hexagram, that it has a fundamental instability. It's a house of cards. That structure is not going to stand. If this line, the second line from the top, had been unbroken, that would have been more stable. But this hexagram, really unstable. Things are going to fall apart, and it may just be a time when inferior people, again, I don't like to use this word inferior, but the I Ching likes to use that word, and I think it's kind of appropriate. Their power is mounting, and going back to the previous hexagram, we can put up with people's folly and people's mistakes up to a point. And maybe we don't have a choice because we don't have the strength to come up with any alternative. But at a certain point, it all collapses. That folly, which to begin with we could tolerate, doesn't get better. It gets worse and worse. And we realize that this is a situation that is intolerable. And then we have to decide what to do. And probably the best thing to do is to retreat, because this is a situation where we don't have a great deal of power. So if we find that people's stupidity and lack of wisdom is just driving us around the bend, we can see disintegration all around us, then the best thing to do is probably to retreat. With splitting apart, the 4 lines in the middle, the nuclear hexagram of splitting apart is hexagram 2, which is a receptive. It's about not doing anything. We can't change things. We just have to, we have to separate. We have to withdraw. Now, this may, of course, have nothing to do with us. This hexagram may be just saying something about the society in which we live. That is the world where we live in. People don't know what they're doing, and things are moving from bad to worse. So perhaps we don't actually have to be involved with it. But in the face of chaos, in the face of stupidity, to begin with, we tolerate it. But at a certain point, we realize it's become intolerable, and we just retreat. And that's my forecast for the I Ching. Just remember, it's just the I Ching for one day. It's not about next week. It's not about next month. And tomorrow is certainly going to be another day. And I'm now going to turn to Princess Anne and Julian Assange. And I think I'll start with Julian Assange. I just noticed the news that he had been released as I was about to do this video. I was just going to focus only on Princess Anne, but then I thought I should mention Julian Assange and consider, why did it happen now? I mean, I think that we were expecting him to be perhaps released, because him going to America, I think the political fallout for America, I think, just would have been too much. And there's America complaining about human rights violations in other countries, and yet here's Julian Assange, who is a political prisoner. He's been a political prisoner for years, and America, could put him on trial, send him to prison for the rest of his life. America can talk about liberty, can't it? Anyway. I think what actually happened was there was some kind of deal where he admitted to one espionage count, but he wasn't, America wasn't going to pursue it, wasn't going to look for his extradition, and so he's gone back to Australia. So let's look at Assange's chart. Where's Julian Assange's chart? Julian Assange, here's his chart. Thing about Julian Assange's chart, it says he was born at 3 p.m. in Townsville, Australia. So 3 p.m. is rather a round time. It's not like 3:02 p.m. It's 3. It's just likely that he probably wasn't born exactly at 3 o'clock. Now looking at his chart, he's got, Saturn on descendant, opposition Neptune. This is someone who has powerful enemies. Saturn's very strong in that chart. Saturn is in Western astrology. Saturn's in Gemini. It's a daytime chart. Saturn rules the air signs by day, and that puts Saturn in a strong position. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? I think from a Western perspective, it would be a bad thing, because it just suggests strong enemies, and indeed he has got strong enemies. Okay, he has, perhaps you could say, gone out of his way to court these strong enemies, or rather to encourage these strong enemies with WikiLeaks. I mean, once you start upsetting the American security establishment, well, you're in real trouble. I mean, it's fortunate he's still alive. And I know that some people were thinking he might die in prison. And it's obviously a big relief that he's finally been released and he's going back to Australia. There is another way of looking at Saturn from a Vedic perspective. So if you look at his chart, and he's got 2 degrees Sagittarius rising. From a Vedic perspective, I'm not going to put up his Vedic chart. I'm just going to describe it. From a Vedic perspective, he would have Scorpio rising, and his Saturn would be in Taurus. So from a Vedic perspective, he would have Saturn in Taurus in the 7th house, and that means that he would have Dikbala. Dikbala is directional strength, and when Saturn is in the 7th in the Vedic chart, it is really strong, and this can be a hard person to beat. You can try your hardest, but they won't go away. Nigel Farage, I think, has Dikbala. So did Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister of Scotland. I know that in the end she collapsed, or at least her government collapsed. Her political career collapsed. But she stayed in that position, First Minister of Scotland, for years and years and years. Even though in her Vedic chart she had Saturn in Aries in the 7th, didn't matter, that Dikbala kept her going. So you have this incredible persistence. And I somehow think that this Dikbala, the way he was in Belmarsh, was it Belmarsh prison, I think, waiting for extradition for years and years and years, I think he had a certain strength. The extradition didn't happen in the end. The courts, the UK courts, in the end, stood up for him, and so I think his strength started to really come out. And so with Dikbala, Julian Assange was really not someone to underestimate, and it will be interesting to see what happens in his life. His moon, he's got moon in Via Combusta. Somehow, I mean, a lot of people have the moon in the Via Combusta, that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. Yeah, in Julian Assange's life, he really does show the Via Combusta, things just happening out of the blue. And incredible turns of events. That's moon in Via Combusta. I don't know. I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't really following the Julian Assange case, and I just saw it just before I was going to do this video that he'd been released. I think that he was taken to Stansted Airport and officially released at Stansted Airport, and that's it. He went home. Now here is the chart, by the way, of his release. I don't know what time he was released, so I'm just guessing. I just went for 3 p.m. Set this chart for Monday and set it for Stansted, which is in eastern England. And what's interesting about that chart is we have moon trine Jupiter. Now that moon trine Jupiter is about release. It just happens, and it's easy after all of this struggle and extradition threats, the courts, the prison system. It's all a huge effort. Then suddenly, Moon trine Jupiter, bang, it's over. It's almost a bit of an anticlimax. And looking at that Moon trine Jupiter in terms of the whole release chart in terms, not Nigel Farage, we're talking about Julian Assange. If we look at the release chart, I've got it somewhere. Oh, so there's Julian Assange's natal chart. Okay, so inside in an inner wheel we have got Julian Assange's chart. On the outer wheel we've got the approximate positions of the planets at the time of his release. So what possibly stands out is the Jupiter. So at the end of May, Jupiter went into Gemini. So that means that Jupiter went into Julian Assange's 7th house. How do we see that? The 7th house is about other people, but Jupiter is a fortunate planet, even though it's in its detriment. You know, it rules Sagittarius. It's in its opposition. Because it rules. Sorry, Jupiter rules Sagittarius. It's in Gemini, so it's in its detriment. But still, Jupiter crossing the descendant seemed to be the time that things started to change for him. You know, we had that probably in retrospect quite critical judgment. One of the courts in the UK refused to extradite him to the US. It seemed he was about to be extradited, but then this court refused. I think that the Americans had been quite dismissive in terms of giving a court information about whether or not he'd be treated, about his treatment. In the US, there was a question also about whether or not he would be allowed to use a First Amendment defense in the US because he wasn't a US citizen. I kind of worry about that. Surely, I mean, I'm not a US citizen. I'm in the US. I assume that the First Amendment covers me. I would hope. So Jupiter going into the descent, crossing into Gemini was probably critical, and that perhaps allowed him to be released. The process of this nightmare finally ending was Jupiter crossing his descendant, and it's kind of appropriate that at the exact time that there's Moon in Aquarius making the trine to Jupiter was when he was freed. Turning to his solar arc directions. Now, the solar arc directions is when you move everything 1 degree for every year of life. So Julian Assange is he's 53 years old. So you move everything in the chart 3 degrees. So looking at Julian Assange's solar arc directions. So these are the solar arc directions for when he was released. Bear in mind, though, as I said, the official time we have for him was 3 p.m. He could have been born at 5 to 3. He could have been born at 5 past 3. Solar arc directions do require a certain amount of accuracy, and for every 4 minutes out your birth is, I think that's 4 minutes out, your solar arc direction will be out by 1 year. So that is the problem with solar arc directions. They do need quite an exact time of birth. So comparing Julian Assange with his solar arc directions, so he has, assuming he was born at 3 p.m., he has his ascendant at 2 degrees Sagittarius. And so look at Uranus. Directed Uranus is almost exactly on his Neptune, and Uranus is right moving onto his ascendant. Sorry, I should make that clear. When I said that accuracy is important with solar arc directions, I'm talking about when I said that for every 4 minutes out the birth is, a forecast will be out by 1 year. I'm referring to the ascendant and the midheaven. I'm not referring to the other planets. So, because the ascendant on average moves about 1 degree every 4 years. It kind of depends on what time you were born. But assuming he was born at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the ascendant would be at 2. It would be at 2 Sagittarius. If he was born earlier, it could have been. He could have had Scorpio rising. But assuming that time is right, directed Uranus is pretty close to his ascendant. So you'd expect directed Uranus on his ascendant to represent something quite major, to some big change. Now that could have been a bad change. It could have been about him being extradited to the US. And look at his Uranus in his natal chart. He has got Sun-Uranus square in his natal chart. So what with the solar arc directions, we've moved the sun this way, and we've moved this whole Sun square Uranus has been moved 53 degrees. So that moves Uranus from up here onto the ascendant, and the Sun has been moved to the square of his ascendant. So that Uranus is not just on his ascendant; it's also square his Saturn. And look at the Sun. The Sun is applying to the square of Saturn. Now you could so easily have seen that direction coming up and forecast that maybe he'd be extradited to the US. It didn't look entirely hopeful there. On the other hand, Jupiter, that transiting Jupiter across the descendant maybe showed us which way it was going to go. Still, he does have Sun moving Sun to the square of Saturn. I think it's still going to be tough. I know that he must be feeling a great sense of relief, finally going home, but it's going to be a difficult adjustment for him, I think, once he's got out of prison. Obviously, it's great he's out of prison, but he will be having to face a new set of challenges. Notice also Venus is starting to move towards a conjunction with his midheaven. Okay, if his time is right, that won't be for a few years, but I think that he is starting to feel it. And that's it with Julian Assange. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to say more about Julian Assange, but I just got the news just as I was about to put out this video, so I wasn't able to do a great deal of preparation. So let me now turn to Princess Anne. Princess Anne was, I apologise if you feel that the royal family is not something you're interested in. I'm not interested in the royal family, really, and I'm just using her as an example. And also, I haven't looked at Princess Anne, and I think that now might be a good time to consider her chart. So here's a horoscope of Princess Anne. Princess Anne is actually quite a popular member of the royal family at the moment. She wasn't always popular. She was really abrasive, and I think she is pretty abrasive. She doesn't mince her words, and I remember talking to an aunt God, 40 years ago, I had this aunt who lived in Gloucestershire, and this aunt was just saying how wonderful Princess Anne was, and the aunt sort of lived in a fairly rural part of the country, and I think that Princess Anne sort of appeals to sort of rural conservatives. She's very much part of an English tradition. You don't complain, you just get on with it. You don't have histrionics, and I think that people appreciate that, or people have appreciated that, but she hasn't always been popular, but now she's becoming increasingly popular. And she's a Leo. She's got the sun in Leo, but she's got the moon in Virgo. In a female chart, I think that the moon in Virgo is probably more important than the sun in Leo. The moon is a female planet. It describes who she is, and I suppose as she's grown older, particularly as she from her early 20s onwards, she would have grown into that moon in Virgo and moved away from that sun in Leo. And she is very down to earth. I think there's this story that she's met Meghan Markle, and she told Meghan Markle that being in a royal family is just like a job. Apparently, Meghan Markle didn't appreciate that advice. That's a very moon in Virgo thing to say. And the moon is not the only planet she's got in Virgo. By the way, I will be doing a quick comparison between Meghan Markle and Princess Anne's chart in a moment. But the moon is not the only planet in Virgo. She's also got Mercury conjunct Saturn, and a very close conjunction between Mercury and Saturn. And I think that has been reflected in her abrasiveness and her use of words. I mean, that was perhaps part of a reason for her maybe being unpopular when she was younger. The way she would just say things that it's as if she just didn't care. She just did it. She said what she said what she felt. But also Mercury is a service sign. It is about hard work, and apparently she is a really hard-working member of the royal family. It's not about whether or not you approve of the royal family. It just so happens that she is really hard-working and she takes her responsibility seriously. And it's back to what she told Meghan Markle, that being a member of a royal family, it is just being a job. That's what it is. And look at her Mars. She's got Libra rising, but she's sort of got Mars in Scorpio pretty close to the ascendant, and that Mars in Scorpio is square the midheaven. So Mars in Scorpio square the midheaven, Mars in its own sign in Scorpio square the midheaven. Yeah, that is hardworking, but again, it reinforces the fact that she is abrasive. A midheaven perhaps is the public, and perhaps that Mars in Scorpio for a time did undermine her reputation, and not necessarily her reputation, but people didn't really like her for a long time, if I remember rightly. And I remember when my aunt decades ago was saying how wonderful Princess Anne was. I remember thinking, that's surprising. I hadn't heard that before. So that's maybe even longer than 40 years ago. But I think that was because the aunt lived in Gloucestershire and Princess Anne lived in Gloucestershire, maybe. But it was a very sort of country conservative kind of thing, this admiration for Princess Anne. Now, Princess Anne has this Mercury-Saturn conjunction. It's so close. I think it's important, and I think it actually relates to the UK. There are some people who think that Princess Anne should have been the Queen and not Prince Charles. Prince Charles and Princess Anne, they seem to be somewhat different. You know, Prince Charles seems to be less, maybe less stable. He has his particular peculiarities, where Princess Anne seems to be more down to earth. Although I understand that both are really into their country pursuits. You know, their horse riding and the farms and so on. Oh, that Virgo. Interesting question here about the house system. Do you use Placidus houses or do you use whole sign houses? You know, when I sort of started learning astrology in the 1980s, people use Placidus, but over the last 20 years, whole signs have become increasingly popular. So from a Placidus perspective, Princess Anne has a load of planets in the 11th house. From a whole sign perspective, all those planets go into the 12th house. So is she more of an 11th house person or a 12th house person? Now, what we do know about Princess Anne is that she is really into horses. Really into horses. She has had several accidents in the past. I think she was concussed at the Montreal Olympics. I think she might have had an accident on a horse in the Moscow Olympics in 1980. I think the equestrian team, competed in the Moscow Olympics, but other teams didn't. So I think I've got that right. The 12th house. Now, the 12th house rules horses, because the way it works is that in astrology, animals, pets, are the 6th house, and the cutoff is goats. Anything larger than a goat is ruled by the 12th house. So, for example, if you keep a pet whale, that's 12th house. Obviously, you should never keep a pet whale. That is something you should never do. But if you were immoral enough to keep a pet whale, pet whale would be 12th house. Horse is larger than a goat, 12th house. Your cat is, of course, smaller than a goat, so it's 6th house. So she's got this big emphasis in the 12th house if you use whole sign houses. And that may reflect her interest in Aquarian stuff, equestrian stuff and horses. Though even if you use the Placidus house, her south node is pretty close to the 12th house cusp. So that's an interesting point. Now, before I look at the accident, I just wanted to quickly compare her chart with that of Meghan. So here's Meghan's chart. And so the story is that Meghan and Princess Anne didn't really hit it off. That Meghan was even a bit shocked, apparently, at what Princess Anne was telling her. And so, this idea, that's not how Meghan saw it. She enters into the royal family and it's just a job. That's not Meghan's view. And so how did Princess Anne occur to Meghan? So here is Meghan's chart in the middle, and Princess Anne on the outside. Both Leos. I suppose when you've got two Leos together, there might be a bit of competition there. Meghan, high opinion of herself. Perhaps with Princess Anne a little more understated. And there is Princess Anne's Uranus. So apparently Meghan was shocked by what Princess Anne said. And so Princess Anne's Uranus was, you can see, making a square aspect to Meghan's Moon, Jupiter and Saturn. So perhaps this Moon is very much who Meghan is. Moon in Libra, Moon in Saturn. Moon is, female planet. That's Meghan. But something about Princess Anne was quite shocking, perhaps to Meghan, and perhaps that's why they didn't really hit it off. And that Uranus is on Meghan's Mars, so more reason why there might have been a bit of a conflict there. It just didn't really work out, and of course, Meghan didn't like what Princess Anne had to say. It's not exact, but there's Princess Anne's Mercury-Saturn conjunction. You know, that very abrasive conjunction. It says what it thinks. It's very down to earth, and it hits Meghan's Venus. Okay, it's a 5-degree orb, but that may be close enough for her to have had an impact. So that Moon Mercury Saturn conjunction that Princess Anne is on Meghan's Venus, and that just might not have gone down too well. So those are a few thoughts. Another thing, there is Princess Anne's Mars. There's her Mars square midheaven. So Princess Anne's Mars is square Meghan's North Node. So, and her Mercury in Libra, North Node. Sorry, Mercury in Leo, North Node in Leo. That's how Meghan communicates. Mercury in Leo, having quite a high opinion of herself, and how she communicates. But then Princess Anne's Mars hits the North Node, hits the nodal axis. So, you know, the North Node, the nodal axis, it can be just about the way you communicate, the way you interact with people. So that's Meghan's nodal axis, and then Anne's Mars hits that nodal axis, and that is straight away, we've got a conflict here. So I thought I'd just look at Meghan's chart and compare it with Princess Anne's. I thought that might be interesting. Oh, another chart, before I look at the accents, I just quickly wanted to look at Princess Anne and England's chart. And I did make the point here that the UK, if you take the 1066 horoscope, if you take the view that England was born on Christmas Day, 1066 at noon, then England has its North Node at 19 Virgo. You know, that's where that's what England should be. It is a fairly unemotional sign, at least compared with Pisces. It's down to earth. That's perhaps what makes England function well. It's not getting obsessed about irrelevant details, getting obsessed about psychology and feeling right and being wonderfully sympathetic and self-pity, but one might associate that with the South Node in Pisces. And Princess Anne's Mercury-Saturn conjunction is on Britain's North Node. So Princess Anne is in a way is reflecting an aspect of British history and society. It is that keep calm and carry on idea. It's a stiff upper lip. It's perhaps that stoicism. It's doing one's duty. It's I suppose, I won't say puritanical. I suppose there is a puritanical tradition somewhere in Britain's history, but it is down to earth. And I think that is perhaps why a lot of people who are perhaps more conservative, perhaps maybe an older generation, regard Princess Anne as being a good role model, perhaps as a person who should have been queen rather than Prince Charles. I know Prince Charles doesn't have anything in Pisces, I don't think, but perhaps Prince Charles more reflects the South Node in Pisces. Prince Charles, Diana, all the emoting with Harry, that's South Node in Pisces. But Princess Anne Mercury Saturn conjunct in Virgo conjunct Britain's north node, that might feel to many people the way Britain should be going, and she should be a reflection of that. Now, as far as the accident is concerned, here is here's a chart of the accident. I don't know when it happened exactly. It happened on Sunday, apparently around 6 p.m. And it was in this village, Mitchinhampton. Yeah, I think that's where my aunt used to live around there. I mean, she's been dead for some time, but and it's in Gloucestershire, the west of the country. So here's the accident, and the question is, what was going on in Princess Anne's chart when it happened? And we have Princess Anne in the middle. No, that's the wrong way around. Let's do that again. Okay. So we'll put Princess Anne in the middle. We'll put the accident on the outer wheel. So the first thing that was happening was Venus. Venus was at 7:55 Cancer when the accident happened, and Anne's Uranus is at 7:55, also at 7:55 Cancer. So she had an exact square, transiting square between Venus and her Uranus, which is kind of a bit surprising. You don't really associate transiting Venus with an accident. So how do we see that? Well, the way I would rationalize it would be that Uranus is a general planet of accidents, number one. Although Uranus is an outer planet, a whole generation of people have Uranus in Cancer, it's probably going to be more sensitive because she's a famous person. And that may be a controversial point, but I think that Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are going to be more vulnerable to transits if you're famous. And particularly if you're connected with the British royal family, or you maybe you're the president, a US president, or someone like that. And that Venus conjunct her Uranus may just be a generic transit. It doesn't matter whether it's Venus or the Sun or the Moon or Mars. It's just a transiting planet hitting her Uranus, and Uranus is the planet of accidents, and that's just how it works. So that is a view. Then there is Saturn. Remember, Saturn is about to go stationary retrograde. So Saturn is goes stationary at 19 degrees 26 at the end of a week. At the time of the accident, Saturn was at 19 degrees 24 Pisces. So Saturn was going stationary within a degree, less than a degree of her Mercury-Saturn conjunction. Now, if we were to use whole sign houses, then of course that Mercury-Saturn conjunction would be in the 12th house, and the 12th house relating to horses. She's really into horses, but she can get hurt by horses. And Saturn, if you use whole sign houses, then you could say, well, Saturn in the whole sign 6th house, being injured by horses. So that would fit. I think this chart with Princess Anne is just good evidence for using whole sign houses. So I have very mixed feelings about the difference between whole sign and plasters, whether one should use one or the other. I suspect the answer is that one should use both. Now, there was a lunar return before the accident. So the lunar return. This is the chart of the precise time the moon returns to the place it was at birth. So this was the lunar return prior to the accident. It happens every month. And so very simply, in this lunar return, we have Uranus on the midheaven. That is in itself is a signature of an accident, then look at Saturn. So her moon, in a lunar return, Moon is opposition Saturn. Now, Moon will be opposition Saturn in all her lunar returns at the moment. So it in itself, that's not especially important. But I think when we look at the Gemini planets, we start to see a T-square here. So the Moon is applying to a square of Mercury, square of the Sun, and so you almost have Saturn on the Sun-Moon midpoint. So what makes that Moon opposition Saturn important is the fact that it is that Saturn is square the Sun and Mercury. So I do think that to an extent the lunar return is indicating an accident there. I mean, not for sure, but and I suppose you'd have to look at the transits as well. So that's the main stuff going on. I suppose we should also look at the solar arc directions. So her solar arc directions. This is so those. Okay, so those were her solar arc directions for the time of her accident, and let's just compare that with. To see if there are any solar arc directions of interest here. I'm not saying necessarily that there are. So I suppose we could look at her this Mercury solar arc directed Mercury. So she's sort of 73. She's now 73 years old, and so solar arc directed Mercury, that Mercury Saturn, which is up here, has now just gone into Sagittarius. I don't know whether solar arc directed sign changes are especially important, but I don't know if that really matters. But perhaps what's of interest is the Sun and the Pluto. So Princess Anne was born with a Sun-Pluto conjunction back in 1950 in Leo. And by solar arc direction, this Sun-Pluto conjunction has just moved into Scorpio. So solar arc directed Pluto, 0 degrees Scorpio, and the Sun at 4 degrees Scorpio. So the midpoint, the Sun-Pluto midpoint, is at around 2 Scorpio, which is relatively close to her Mars. So you could say that she had the directed Sun-Pluto conjunction was hitting her Mars, and maybe that's what contributed to the accident. So that is certainly a possibility. You might also notice that directed Uranus a year or two ago crossed over her Mercury-Saturn conjunction. With directions, I'd probably regard that as being a bit late, but maybe directions hang around for a year or two, and we're just looking for some trigger to actually make them happen. So those are a few thoughts about Princess Anne's accident. I was going to look at the astrology of her kidnapping in 1974, or attempted kidnapping, but I think I'm running out of time. So that's Princess Anne's chart, and I hope you found it of some use. Yes, it's good news about Julian Assange, that he's finally been released. And yeah, that's it. And I hope you found this video useful. If you did find it useful or interesting, then I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.